I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Colton Ryan, one of the stars of The Girl from Plainville. So you play Conrad Roy, who was a real life teenager who died by suicide, and it became a very famous case because his girlfriend was convicted for encouraging him to kill himself. And it's a really heartbreaking story. But I think in terms of a dramatic retelling, I feel like it could have been exploitative or just feel wrong in some way. So I'm curious about just the approach here that made you feel like you were kind of in safe hands with this material.
Yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, you've kind of spelled out the exact way I I did approach it. I mean, it was the point of entry from the artist involved in this was the reason why it felt so. I mean, well, listen, I wasn't. I was begging to be a part of it essentially when I read about it because when I got it in my inbox, I read the log line and I actually, this is true. I was doing it before I went. I live in New York. Before I went to the subway and lose reception and everything. So I read the log line and I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. But it kind of pinged that I was like, I feel like I know this, but I wasn't. It didn't immediately associate. And when I got out of the subway, I kind of like did a little deeper dig and I put two and two together that this was that. And I actually, that was the moment that I was like, I have to be a part of this because the log line was so emotional and consequential, really. It was very three-dimensional. And so much so that I actually didn't associate it with this like very hollow thing that I remembered from when I was a little bit younger, when it was kind of running, you know, adjacent to, my life. And that's when I was like, okay, they have the right point of entry.
Well, what were some of the more important aspects just from looking into him and his story and just his mannerisms and things like that that you felt like you were able to key into or maybe even, relate to yourself?
Right. Well, I mean, I was actually talking about this last night. I feel like no matter what, I wanted to subvert the expectation because I felt like it would have been simple. I mean, a lot of people really think they know this boy. Probably they think they really have a grip on, oh, it's probably very dark and very maybe broken, damaged, all these things that we pigeonhole people who maybe have that sort of ending. And I just knew that that couldn't be the case. If we're going to spend 8 hours getting to know this boy, he deserved a lot more than that. And as I got to know him more, that's where the subversion kind of just, I didn't have to do any lifting because the more and more I read about this kid, the more and more I got his like personal sort of journaling and tidbits from people who knew him and things like that. It was very clear to me. It was like, well, this kid's pretty funny. I mean, like he's actually quite whip smart and like honestly, his takes on viewing the world as an outsider, I was like, I really respond to that. Honestly, it's very healthy. It's like a very healthy amount of cynicism. And I just knew that I was like, well, all that has to be included because I, my first reaction wouldn't have been like, oh, wow, he was really imaginative. But that was a big part of who he was. And I felt like, well, it'd be easy to not go that route. And that was the thing I wanted to key into was like, well, he deserves it. So, and it is honest, it is who he was. So why not just present it that way instead? Because I feel like people expected this, probably this other thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm also just curious if you felt the need to sort of not necessarily impersonate him, but just get all of the little physical traits of him right.
Yeah, I mean, because I didn't have like a ton of tape, it wasn't like,
Right.
and I also, of course, don't have that personal connection. So like the only tidbit of raw material of like, oh, this is the way maybe where his voice sat in the register, or where like kind of how his eye movements worked. Anything that was sort of more physical, more tangible. I only had these 3 videos, which I'm very grateful and lucky to have had, that he shared with us, with these like kind of, which you see in the show, these sort of video confessionals, this honestly taped just like this, like we're doing right now.
Right. Yeah.
And those were beyond the other sort of the plethora of research they gave me. Those ended up just kind of being Bible, because it was like, well, anytime I want to feel closer or try to key into something I don't know, I could go back to these like very vulnerable, very open-hearted messages that he just left us. And then I can go through the technical as well of like, okay, that's interesting. He's 18 years old and his voice is 10 pitches deeper than mine. So, okay, I'm going to have to figure that out. And yeah, so I used those. I mean, other than that, it was like beyond getting kind of the note perfect part of that section, that part of the performance, knowing that we spanned him from age 16 to 18. That's where the rest of like sort of like, okay, well, I'm going to have to, through my own expression, fill in the gaps of like, all right, how can I blend these two things together?
Right. Well, I actually did want to touch on those little video diaries that
Sure.
he made. I'm just curious about filming those and getting into the mindset of what he was going through. And yeah, just like sitting in front of a computer screen like we're doing, and just, how different those scenes might have been compared to, the more traditional scenes where you're bouncing off another actor.
Right. Well, actually, that was my 3rd day on set, and it was yeah, well, it was nice. It ended up being kind of like a ripping of the Band-Aid, because I do think I came in a little in the like transformative mindset. I was kind of like, I really have to like I get to key into who this kid is and like lose myself, and I'm not normally like that. That's not really the kind of actor I normally am, but it was my first time tackling a real person, someone who existed. And as that came up, I'd done 2 very light scenes before that, and it was the 3rd day. It was like I was like, all right, here, I'm starting now. This is really, we're gonna find it today. It was 20 minutes of footage, me alone. So I actually was I was in control of it. I had a computer like this and a camera just like right here, and I was allowed to call cut whenever I wanted to. I was kind of, they were very trusting, and it was lovely. And I think it's kind of why we got what we got. And well, this is the longer version story of this, but it's kind of strange, but it just so happened it was a push that we landed on that day, why we did it that day. And it just so happened in the push to land on the same day as the anniversary of my father's death. And very strangely, and it happens in the show, I think you've probably seen it, when they recount the video for Chloe, when she watches it, there is a section in there where it talks about like, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have a parent, or if I didn't, I have a great mom, a great dad, but I don't know what I would do if I didn't. And it was really sort of, I mean, I'm into the cosmic. I got my, my astrology thing. I'm into that kind of stuff a little bit. So that day I was already kind of like a raw nerve. Obviously I was a little exposed, but I never read that part of any of the monologue per se, right? I'd never seen that paragraph ever about, what would it be like? And I wouldn't think very much of that because it was 20 minutes of material. And of course I listened to it all the time. So of course some of it just kind of droned in. I couldn't nail every single moment of it. But it was funny because both Lisa Cholodenko and Liz Hanna, who were there that day kind of guiding it with me, it was very like intimate, also had never heard that section before. Every single one of us had been working on it for months at this point. And no one really had like it registered that was a part of this soliloquy, of this like huge monologue. And like I said, I don't know if you're into that kind of stuff, but it was too weird because at the time I was looking for a sign. I really was. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to really honor this boy. And I feel like I was calling out to somebody to be like, I'm not trying to be sacrilegious about this, but I have people I've lost. If they can somewhere just say to this boy, like, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to do everything I can. And as I got to know him a lot more, he is very mischievous and kind of impish in his humor and whatnot. And I kind of, when I leave it more and more, I'm like, it felt like the sign back to be like, it's kind of messing with me in a cute way of like, because it really, as I read it and it actually ends up being featured in the show, I just broke down. I mean, I just kind of like, it hit me right there in the moment. And I didn't want to do that because that's not in the video. He didn't break down right there. But we ended up thinking it was useful for the show. And I kind of do think it ended up being my sort of like North Star of if I'm going to make this, the pain of this real and the lightness, the love of this real, I have to, you know, it felt like I was getting permission to be like, well, you have to bring yourself to it or else it won't be honest.
Wow. That's wild. I mean, it sounds like you've been very affected by just the material. I actually talked to Chloe a couple weeks ago just about the heaviness of this material, and she had mentioned like it really did weigh on her.
Yeah.
You know, for as much as she's this, you know, great actress from working since the 90s, like this material, like you really, it weighed on her, especially because you were following, you know, COVID protocols and everything. So there wasn't a lot of room for like going out or just hanging out with castmates or anything. So yeah, I'm just curious, how much were you affected by the material? Like after especially like a long day of shooting, like you're going home at the end, what do you do?
Well, there was like a couple days, although I will say we didn't hang out much, but when we did hang out, we went to Chloe's house and we called it Club 70, and it was a lot of fun. That's all I'll say. And no, it was 5 months of this, and like honestly, the storytelling is so my taste and so like I think interesting that, as you can tell from the ebb and flow of the show, it's not all heavy. I mean, at one point we put on Letterman jackets and you know, lip sync Glee,
and do a Glee number.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
So some days, genuinely, like that actually happened directly on my worst week. It was episode 4, which I really do think probably was the heaviest because it was recreating an attempt, and then it was also being in the hospital. A very important moment in the kind of character arc of the show of like of the trajectory of being in that bed and waking up, and then mom being there and Chloe being there and just profusely apologizing. It was just hard. I mean, it was so bad. I got actually a sinus infection because I just had to kind of cry all week, like 4 out of 5 days of the week. But right smack dab in the middle was the Glee number. And so it kind of ended up being this like literal and quite metaphorical lift for everybody. You could, the crew included, you could feel like, because I thought about them a lot during it, because it's sure. I mean, I think it's the easier headline always is like, oh, it was so hard. It was like, but I was thinking about actually this yesterday, like the crew, I always could feel it because I would show up, you know, it's a very, it's a show with a lot of storylines, very nuanced, like ensemble kind of piece. And I'd show up 2 days after my last shoot and, hey guys, like I'm game, I'm ready. And I could feel the crew just heavy, like just carrying this weight around because they had to see every inch of it. And for me, half the show, I'm an audience member because there's a whole timeline I'm not a part of. So a lot of it, I'm, you know, and I don't know, it felt like feeling their heaviness, knowing that in a way I was kind of symbolically playing a lot, kind of carrying a lot of their heaviness right in the show. It just felt like the whole thing in the making of it deserved light. It deserved like I can't speak for everyone, but I definitely felt like, honestly, in the strangest way, more affirmed about what it is to be here, to love and want to be here when I got to know this boy. That, and luckily, like a lot of people on set were goofy. I mean, like a lot of us, like we make dark stuff, but like Elle and I can like, there are some when you watch the scenes back where I'm thinking like, my God, I can't believe they got that, because we'd giggle through some of the things because it was like, oh my gosh, all we're doing is just spilling our guts, the most vulnerable, intimate parts of ourselves probably like twice an episode. So I think it was really good to be reminded that we were all holding hands in it together, and just like we have this right now. We have the capacity to laugh and to love, and like we should, because that's otherwise what is the point of making this, you know?
It's definitely important to have that balance. And just, I mean, obviously one of the most crucial, probably the most crucial element of the show is this relationship between Conrad and Michelle. So obviously with you and Elle Fanning having this super intense connection, just curious, how much were the two of you able to work on that before you started filming?
No, not really. It was a situation where, I mean, she's a very in-demand, awesome person. So
Right.
she showed up like, I think actually I was in Savannah proper like a couple weeks before she got there, because she was finishing The Great. And she literally like had like the Antoinette-esque dress on as she was like getting on the plane to come and reading the script. And she, of course, had been attached a long time before me. So she obviously had it in her bones, but I think it was funny because I think both of us felt that the intimacy part of it was always going to be a leap of faith. Like we kind of had one proper table rehearsal before we shot our first scene together, which was episode 3, the very first text message fantasy exchange, which was like a 4-pager, had a lot of like it was a lot of like creative decision making. It was because, you know, it was a vocabulary we were setting up for the rest of the show to be successful. It was all these things at once, and yet it was also like, nice to meet you, which I mean is most of this job anyway. But I won't speak for Elle, but we have a very sort of kindred view of the world and of life, and I think that was very clear because we got in for that first, you know, discussion. Like it was funny because we were talking about all this, the timeline and the logistics and obviously what we're going to be doing, very, very heavy material. And she kind of kept looking over and just making like funny faces to me. And I was like, this girl is kooky. And so am I. So I'm like, good. I'm cut from the same cloth. Good. And it was nice because I feel like we didn't have to like vibe each other for trust. It was kind of, for some bizarre reason, was just kind of implicitly there. And I'm really thankful for it because I can feel it when I watch the show. I'm like, wow, there was no gestation period. There was no, patent period of like trying to figure out how do we make this work? It kind of just, we agreed that it was going to be important to. And yeah, I'm very thankful for it.
Wow. Well, I mean, it sounds like a very transformative experience for you, dare I say, just doing this show. I mean, do you still feel the impact of it? Just however long you filmed it, I don't know how many months ago, but
Yeah.
are you still feeling it today?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I used to, when we started this process where I had to like, you know, talk to people about it, it was about a month after we'd wrapped, and every time I would kind of open my mouth about it, I would just start to cry and choke up, and it was kind of bad. It was like because people would just ask me like, what was he like? And I think like very simple, like these are the questions you're going to be getting. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I've gotten to a point now where you kind of put on the other hat, which is like, all right, well, I'm now the actor who performed it. It's not this pure thing anymore. I'm talking about it. And so I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I've gotten to the point where I've kind of, been able to be removed, because otherwise I would just be a puddle on the floor. And because I mean, you said it. I mean, it's if you can tell already that it's honestly quite perceptive, because I'm not sure I'll have, at least in the near future, a more profound experience in working. I mean, I felt when I left it more in tune with who I was than anything else I'd ever done before, as I really tried to like bury my head and get into this kid because he deserved it. It was funny how much, looking at him, how much, I don't know, seeing the light and the love in this kid, that like it really kind of made me love myself a lot more. It was really, you can't pay for that. It's like kind of priceless. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on, I think. For those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews just like this, and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Colton, truly congrats on this great work, and thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.